Howdy, folks. We're looking at Edge Magazine, the fourth one, number 4, published January 1994, probably released in stores early December 1993. And as always, it's discussing the future of video gaming. That's right. And this month, we see a rather obscure game on the cover. What's the name of the game? Well, apparently it's Mega Race. Let's read at the bottom left. It says, developed by Paris-based software house Cryo, Mega Race on 3DO shows that the Europeans have the design flair to match their US counterparts. Edge examines Mega Race and Cryo's stunning new titles, Saurus and Dragon Tales. Do you remember those games? I didn't. So, so there's quite an article about Cryo. You might remember them making the first Dune game and some other popular titles in the 90s. But Mega Race wasn't one of their most popular ones. But let's check it out on the inside. So, the traditional black page, but here it says Edge, if you look closely. And yet, it's late 1993, so people are still talking about all the new systems, the CDI, the Jaguar, the CD32, the 3DO. We have Peter Molyneux, who we will often see in Edge Magazine, and quite a big article about the TurboGrafx 16, or the PC Engine. Some reviews and some previews. So, what's the cutting edge in late 1993? Well, looks like Sony's making something, a multimedia machine. Also seen as Project Unreality because it's not with Nintendo. Yeah, they have a picture of all these Sony things. So, yeah, as if the PlayStation would replace all these, but that wasn't the case. We see here a CDI, which would be portable. I wonder if anybody has one of those. And we have the mock version of the Super Nintendo CD player, which Sony would help make. One of the greatest what-ifs in video game history. So, CDI continues to improve. Now you can watch Top Gun on the CDI. The Jaguar gets delayed. And look at that, we get 3D games in the arcade for the first time. Like Air Combat, and I don't know this shooting game. What is it called? Mad Dog McCree. Oh, that's not 3D. That probably used full motion video. We see at the bottom the intro to Dracula X, which used CD. Most interesting is, of course, one moment please, is the picture of Ridge Racer, which was at the time easily the best looking game on the planet. So racing games and shooting games for the arcade. Some gossiping, won't go into that. Virtual reality is all the hype, and apparently there's this virtual reality ride being made with Alien in the theme. We even have Sigourney Weaver presenting it. This was back at the time when most of the Alien movies are great. So people probably looked forward to doing that. We have the charts. So, it's Mario All-Stars, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Mortal Kombat. And, look at that. Night Trap is now only second place in the Mega CD. Now it's Batman Returns at number 1. So, and Amiga, of course, is Frontier Elite 2, which we will be reviewed this one. Let's look at the most wanted. Do I know any of these games? Number 1, Total Eclipse. I think we talked about that last time. I already forgot it. Power Slide. That would become Stunt Race FX. Forgotten Castle, fancy looking RPG. Virtual Racing, and Crescent Galaxy for the Jaguar. Again, I forget these games because they didn't make an impact. So, let's look at some previews. For the 3DO, we have Demolition Man, which used a lot of full motion video and pictures to look quite convincing. I mean, look at that. But other than that, it's just a bland shooting game. Kind of like the Terminator 2 game in the arcade. Now, Cryo at the time was at the top of their game, and now they were incorporating nifty 3D graphics. And here's some talk about this dinosaur game, which I couldn't find on the internet. And this role-playing game, here it's called, hold on a sec, Dragon Tales, but it was, the official name became Dragon Lore, and it got fairly good reviews. And another game they describe, as like on the cover, is Mega Race, which was one of the early racing games for 3DO, and it was better than average, but still nothing to write home about. You weren't going to get you weren't going to pay $700 for a racing game like this. It wasn't as good as F-Zero. On the Super Nintendo, we have R-Type 3, which didn't have the slowdown which Super R-Type had. And yeah, it's one of the best side-scrolling shooters for the Super Nintendo, if not one of the best made all time. So here we have this 3D racing game for the Jaguar. I don't recall it very well. It looks really bland. And the same company, Rebellion Software, they made a game a lot of people remember, which is Aliens vs. Predator, which looked fantastic in still screens. I mean, look at those shadows. But in reality, I love how you can look through the windows here. That's quite impressive. But in reality, it looked more like Wolf 3D than Doom, and it played very simply. Even though you had 3 different characters, the gameplay was very simple, just going through corridors and shooting things that moved. Doom was a much better game, and they released about at the same time. Now this game was closer to Wolf 3D in complexity. Captive 2 I've never played. Apparently it's some kind of role-playing game, but then with a science fiction look to it. You have 4 different characters and you go through the hallways and beat up enemies, getting experience. Well, Elite 2 was going to be very big, of course. The sequel to one of the greatest games of the 80s. I'm not familiar with the Scavenger series, to be honest. Looks like a rather bland, maybe pretty, what do you call it, coaster shooter. So, not interested in that. In this game, I don't know at all. Journeyman Project, that must be the demo name. And, oh, fancy graphics. And at the time, Edge was mostly interested in graphics, even though they were a more mature publication. So, yeah, if you had cool looking graphics, you would make it into Edge. What is this? You can, the only place on Earth for games this Christmas? What? Amiga Game Boy. Ah, it's a commercial for some company. Future Zone. Yeah, we have that in Holland too. Okay, so Bullfrog at the time was one of the biggest companies with titles like Theme Park, Magic Carpet. Before this, they had Populous. So later they would have Dungeon Keeper. So top of the game, Bullfrog in the mid-90s. Magic Carpet looked fantastic. Played pretty well too. It wasn't as good as Doom, but I think it looked better. And they also had Theme Park, which then evolved into the roller coaster tycoon games. And here we have Creation, which was never released, and it looks like something like Spore with all these animals in water. I think it's mostly a submarine game though, but never released. So yeah, Bullfrog. We have the release dates, Intel chips being advertised, and here is a feature on the PC Engine. And they describe a lot of their better games, like Devil Crash, one of the first very interesting pinball games for consoles. And a lot of different versions of the PC Engine. We have the Japanese version and then added with the CD, the American version with the CD add-on. Yeah, games like Parodius, Bonk, Ghouls and Ghosts, very good translations from the arcade. Champion Edition looked great. Way of the Wise games, which are also on Super Nintendo. And more renditions of the PC Engine. This was such an amazing device at the time. We had Game Boys and we had this, which had all the colors and graphics of the PC Engine. And then there was this kind of like an add-on of sorts. I think only 5 games supported this. But yeah, the super graphics, not a big deal. And the greatest game on the PC Engine was Bomberman, if you ask me, because you could play with 4 people. And 1 player was kind of boring, with 4 player, one of the greatest games of all time. And finally, we have Dracula X, which would be the other greatest game for the PC Engine, which we'll be getting a review later on. So this was late 1993, and the console was dying. It would soon be replaced by a 32-bit version. So yeah, that's why they wrote a whole article on the greatness of the PC Engine, which had quite a lot of good games. Not as many as the Mega Drive or Genesis, not as many as Super Nintendo, but still enough to take a look at, especially if you love solid 2D gameplay. Still 1993. We're still all in love with Jurassic Park. So on to the reviews. First we have Cybermorph, which most people know as that game on the Jaguar with that green head constantly taunting you for not flying well, which oddly enough you don't see on any of the screenshots. It's a rather lackluster 3D flying game. It's not as exciting as Star Fox. At least you can turn around 300 degrees, but why bother? I mean, you know, sticking on rails is more exciting. It gets an 8, probably because of the quality graphics, but no, it should have been a 5 or a 6 because it's just not an interesting game. Here we have an advertisement for Plok, one of the underrated platforming games for the Super Nintendo. Very colorful, nice and fast. It's just good platforming fun. And Rayman totally ripped them off, you know, with the limbs being able to detach. I hope you've heard of this game, perhaps the greatest action RPG of all time, Secret of Mana. You can play with 3 people at the same time. Kind of a cute story, but mostly just solid gameplay, nice graphics, good sounds. It's just nice to be in this world and beat things up and level up. So it gets a 9, deservingly so. Myst, another classic, undeservingly so, and Edge was onto them. They only gave a 6, and they write in the review, yeah, it's nice to walk around and look at the pretty scenery, but the puzzles are just weird. And they're right. This game doesn't have the character of the Maniac Mansion or Beneath the Steel Sky games. And the puzzles are kind of contrived, if you ask me. I kind of like the backstory about the 2 brothers, but no, it's not worth going through all those silly puzzles just to get the story. But classic, probably because a lot of people got CD-ROMs and they were like, hey, I want to use my CD-ROM for my computer and, well, I want something that looks nice. So they bought Myst. And we have Elite 2, finally, only gets a 7. I think it should have got an 8, maybe a 9, because this was everything an Elite game could have been at the time. It had a couple extra things which did improve it, and still, space trucking hasn't improved much since Elite 1. Elite 2 does improve on it a little bit. So, yeah, good game. Oh, and finally, one last game to discuss. Samurai Showdown, at the time, I think the best fighting game with Street Fighter II Turbo. A lot of different characters who played differently. The gore was pretty cool at the time, the finishing moves. But it played well, it looked well, and it was the best game Neo Geo's ever made. So we'll leave it at that. Next time we'll do part 2 and finish the magazine. See you then.